Rescued, the film story. Um, I like this story a lot. I believe it could be in a theater, and it would be something like, well, very unique. It's not a blockbuster like Star Wars and Star Trek, but it's so powerful because it's something that could actually happen. It's not even like sci-fi. All the technologies that are used. Well, we could actually do the movie. All of it. If we had the money and the time and the workers and the materials, we could do it. The unfortunate circumstances of the film is a nice drama of sabotage and space drama. And the people, go through some challenges, and it has, a good ending. So it's a story, I don't think it's a $1 billion film because, that's for something that has amazing technologies and stuff like that. But who knows? Something like Rescue, which is more quaint or placid, could, popularize. This is kind of like the Titanic, actually. It's a Titanic in space, and it has, things like it, like Rose and, you know, Jack and stuff. It has all of it in it. So it's, well, it's, you never know what could happen. So I hope you enjoyed the film. PolarX is on the site because, well, I have a lot of doubts about inhabitation because there's challenges out there, like in the film of Rescue. There's military issues. There's chemical issues, like none of those planets outside of Earth care about Earth. Those planets don't care about astronauts. They don't care about anything. Those planets, well, we think they're hostile to humans. But it's a challenge for us to build these technologies so they're safe to humans, and that's what I call the A equals B polar X math. We kind of make chambers equate the technologies of Earth, and then we're okay. We'll live on a base. It'll be just like Earth inside of the base. So it's okay, you know, in polar X. But in my version, it's, well, I like powerful science and mathematical accuracy. So, well, polar X is like a horizontal system that uses humanoids. Humanoids to send into space and, into hostile places to humans, and to build bases there and functional things, and to begin preliminary stages with like fish and plants and greenhouses and aquatic farms beneath the surface of these ice moons and Mars and whatnot. And the humanoids are not ingesting, chemicals that we don't know about, but they're detecting these things to see if it exists there. We need to have a humanoid that lives in Mars for like 6 months, for a long period of time, and he's constantly testing the air quality, and have instruments around him that test the air quality for like 6 months to see the exact nature. We want to know how safe it is, because then we'll have to just, build like wash chambers for our astronaut suits and wash off the dust when we come in, air blow it off, and blow all of that stuff outside. And then when we enter, it's a clean astronaut suit after being outside, has no, potential chlorine or anything, dust or anything on it. And we shouldn't breathe in microdust anyway. It would accumulate in our lungs a little bit. We'd probably get phlegm and cough it out. We'd be okay, but we'd always be like, if we're always breathing in microdust. So you have to blow it off in a wash when you enter in an astronaut suit when you're living in Mars. That's just common. Or just stay inside, and, let fewer people do that stuff. And let the robots handle it. That's how they do it in this system. So, I think we have the understanding that we're going to Mars, with astronauts. And we think it'll happen from the space programs of several nations and private space sectors. We're going to Mars. And we're going to discover in advanced technologies how to survive there. So I leave up Rescued and I say that's human. I like that story. I like being in the capsules myself. I just sit there sometimes. And I reread my micro stories of each astronaut. And I read about Isabo, Miliara, Ramasea. I read about Terrence. I read about all of these things. And these are astronauts that were sent away as castaways in the planet of Mars and had different struggles, you know. And I like to sit there and contemplate what it would be like and what would happen. Sometimes over the past 8 years, I've actually reiterated the story like, well, many, many times. And I used it as like a study of Mars, like I'll sit in a capsule and maybe find a location in Mars and, you know, the pictures of that area and the rover studies and everything. And you could just sit there and say, well, this is what it would be like if it happened. If there was a sabotage and we had to escape in capsules, you know, and we survived. And then there was a rescue system, you know, that came and got us, which would happen, you know. It happens in Earth. Boats go missing as castaways for long distances sometimes, like hundreds of miles. And the Coast Guards are nice enough to go out and find them and they retrieve them from the ocean. We have a rescue system in Earth. It's the Coast Guards. They even use helicopters. You know, we could even advance the rescue system in Earth to use smaller, less expensive, unmanned aircraft vehicles that we could launch from, like, land, and they could patrol areas of the ocean during, like, a known castaway from a storm or something. But those people should leave with radio beacons. You know, the boats, they should all have a radio beacon. I would, if I was like the president of, let's say, I'm the president of, like, well, Nicaragua or something. You know, and there's a lot of boats down there, a lot of nice boats too, real fast speed boats, everything. And a lot of aircraft, and I'm not saying that it's always drugs, because it's not always drugs down there. But there's beautiful beaches and beautiful harbors and beautiful boats and yachts all over the place in Nicaragua and Brazil and Colombia. Well, since I've given you this story, Rescued, and there's a rescue system, why not have us all go in there and check it out and go on YouTube and search, well, there was a boat missing in Nicaragua, and you know, they sent helicopters and boats, Coast Guard, police boats, and actually rescued the guy. I've done it in the last 8 years. I know of a rescue of a guy from east coast of South America. I think he was from Chile. He was on a boat and he ended up surviving like all the way across almost to Australia. That's like, wow, thousands of miles. That was an amazing rescue. They found him on an island, and he said that he was swatting seagulls with a stick, and then he would drink their blood, and he would eat the meat of the seagulls. So he always had like fluid to drink, water from their blood, and then he always had meat to eat with the seagulls. Because they were always on him trying to eat him, you know, they were attacking him. So they're right in front of him, and you just grab him and, you know, and kill the seagull and drink its blood, you know. But the wind brought him all the way across the Pacific Ocean, which is, you know, totally amazing. They found him on an island, and then he had, you know, a place to live and fish. And well, they found him, you know, and he was able to maybe like put like logs on the beach and formulate the word, you know, SOS or something by, you know, 300 logs or something, and people are found by that stuff. That's a rescue system that exists in the Pacific Ocean, around the equators and south of the equators. It doesn't happen north of the equator much. There's probably some castaways like in the colder northern regions. But I would say it happens mostly like Hawaii to south, and then, you know, like Caribbean south. Or closer in toward the Asian islands, like Indonesia and Malaysia up there, where it's, well, it's still kind of oceans and islands there. There's got to be castaways in there all the time, and I'm going to study it on YouTube because it'll help me to perceive this rescued system in Mars, where they're finding castaways somehow they always survive by some crazy tactic. They can catch a fish somehow, or a bird, or, because there's no fresh water, and they have to have hydration for a certain period of time before they get rescued. That's what's happening in rescue to all these astronauts. And I like to sit there and think of what it would be like if I was a castaway on a planet that was, well, kind of like safe to humans, with our suits and provisions and capsules. You can't be a castaway in Jupiter and Saturn. You'd be engulfed by storms and electric radiation, and you'd die as soon as you enter the planet. You can't be a castaway in Mercury or Saturn because, well, it's too hot and you just die from the heat. So obviously you have to be a castaway, if you are, in a planet or moon that is like in the inhabitable zone of a star, which is, well, it's not too hot and it's not too radicalized, or whatever it is. It has to be something like the moon if you're a castaway, but that's easy to rescue somebody on the moon. So, this isn't sci-fi going into hyperspace to another galaxy, and it's, planets where there's castaways that happened from a spaceship that was like kind of hurling into space and it lost control. It got sucked into the gravity of a planet. Well, I'd like to see that film, that would be exciting. Instead of always they're winning with these spaceships and they never lose, or they're blown up by some laser blast. What if the ship is just, well, it broke up or something happened and, there was a fire on board, an explosion that wasn't from a laser blast and they're not dead. They're surviving in this destroyed ship and it gets sucked into the gravity of a planet and they're like, well, we have to enter space capsules and spacesuits. We have to survive on this planet. Is it inhabitable somewhat? Is there poison or radiation? They find out it's a pretty decent planet, And they end up on ground, and there was radio call from the ship the entire way, and so the other spaceships are coming to rescue them. That happened with the Titanic, where they were going down because of the iceberg, and I put it up right online. I should put it up with rescued. The actual radio transmission, it's Morse code. It's going beep, 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 beep. This is Titanic. Just to hear that and see that on the screen is more amazing than the movie Titanic, if you ask me. And it's about being rescued in a remote area, and they're essentially castaways in the Atlantic Ocean in this ship called the Titanic going down. Beep, 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 beep. This is Titanic. And that was the end of it. Beep, 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 beep. This is Titanic. It said it again. Finally, the Carpathia, which was like within, I don't know, I think it was 1,000 miles or something of the Titanic, had to change course. But before it did, it was getting beep, beep, beep. This is Titanic. Beep, beep, beep. We have, a serious issue. We've hit a berg. Please come quickly. Carpathia sends the message back, and it's on the screen in text. Beep, 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 beep. We will arrive soon, to assist you. And they did. The Carpathia saved like half of the passengers, but still, I think like almost 1,000 died in the Titanic or more. A lot of them died. There wasn't enough boats. That was a problem. And it was in the era in 1911 or so where they didn't, they always had problems in the beginning, After that, they didn't have problems. They had enough boats on every steamship in the ocean. After the Titanic went down, there's enough boats. But not on the Titanic. Wasn't enough. So, we think, well, this is studying like rescued in Mars. This is a major rescue of a ship. To compare it to my film is kind of fun, actually, because there's the same thing. There's a romance between a young lady and a mech engineer who dies on the ship, and she's struggling afterwards, in this rebuilt atrium after they destroy the city by the ship, and he's dead, and she copes with it by, buying a wedding ring, saying that she would like to have married him and that she would like to be alive to discuss him with all these Martians, and be like, well, a devotion about the matter of his sacrifice to save these people, you know. And so she found purpose in living instead of, you know, wanting to die. But that's like the Titanic. What's in the rescued there? I mean, it's all these people jumping into capsules, and the whole ship went down. But I didn't mean it to write it like the Titanic, you know. I didn't mean any comparison whatsoever. I just meant it that it was this big machine, and they were going to build the connectives. And there's this, well, this lead commander, Stephen Dorn, has this plan to dimensionalize Mars to make it like a better place, but he had to do some really crazy things for it to occur. And he had to kill himself doing it, you know. He just found that there was no other way. He was a genius in Martian technologies, and he decided there was just no other way. It had to be done how he did it. He sabotaged the ship and saved the lives of all the astronauts, except for Richard Bannon, who tried to stop it. You know, he stayed with the ship, didn't go out with the capsules, but he could have done that and survived. So that was provided for Richard Bannon also by the lead commander. He chose not to go out. So it was a Titanic, you know, in space, but it's becoming a rescued system. Also happened in Titanic. So this is what I've done since then. I've actually studied Titanic, you know. I've watched, you know, the Titanic movie like 6 times myself. But I found it to be more powerful to watch the actual radio transmission as it came up in text. Beep, 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 beep. This is Titanic. Something came through, and it was just like, wow, that was the most powerful moment in history, you know. This is Titanic. Come quickly. That's greater than the $1 billion that's made in, you know, the film Titanic from the 1990s. That's greater than all things. That's the greatest rescue in history, and it was done by a ship that was identical to the Titanic, and it's called the Carpathia. And they rescued all the people in boats, and over 1,000 people died in the Titanic and went under the ocean. So, they used radio technologies to find the Titanic, you know. If there was no radio, well, there was no radio before the Titanic. Like, only 15 years prior, there was no radio on the ships of the oceans. 300 years of sail ships, you know, with the pirate ships and the galleons, and then the final clippers, like the English clippers and the California clippers would go like 5 times faster than a pirate ship. Full of sails to the sky and narrower and longer and bigger. Those machines were just amazing. Those ships didn't have any radios. There was no radios. If the Titanic went down 15 years earlier, there would be no rescue, and all of them would have died. But the radio technology reached the Carpathia, which was another steamship the same size as the Titanic, came by and rescued all of the people in the boats. So it's like, you know, the beacons in Mars. Some of them don't have beacons, so they have to be found by new technologies, and that made the rescue system develop in Mars. So all this stuff is very real on my site. It could be, you know, it could be. And, well, it's the only place that it could ever happen, you know. And the lead commander knew this. And the situation and the scenario that unfolded as a result of his so-called genius, which did work out in the sequel of Arctic Racer to be that, well, his particular formula forced them to, like, exceed Earth and survive. It did work the way he said it, but there was always questions, you know, throughout the process, like, well, it caused it to advance, but they could have advanced the system without that crash, you know. They could have just gained the knowledge that they should build, you know, faster racers and rescue capsules and rescue beacons and orbiters and spacecraft, supply drops from rockets. You could stock, you know, after the system of the lead commander, Stephen Dorn, they stocked the orbit station with tonnages of food modules that could be dropped for a capsule that fell to a barren place if there was like a space battle. It could happen with a smaller ship. Like it's coming to Mars to drop cargo and stuff. And they're starting to use spaceships, and it's not just rockets, And, they come to the orbit station to drop off food, and then they go back to Earth with stuff from this orbit station that's from Mars, and they bring that back to Earth and sell it at Earth, and it's a commerce. It's a lot of money they make. But the ship's smaller, and somebody puts a rocket through it, and that's a space battle, and they eject from that ship, and then it could happen like a week from Mars, like it's way away from Mars, like for an entire week, and then they eject in a capsule which has some rocketry to accelerate that capsule. There's enough food and provision where it actually can survive in just a space capsule 1 week back to Mars, accelerated to the speed of that spaceship, but back to Mars, And then, with the new rescue system, they would have radio connection to the orbit station, and if they had control of that capsule, they could just dock it on the orbit station, and so there wouldn't be a castaway. But if they didn't have control of the capsule, let's say for some reason, like they didn't have that much control to land it on the orbit station, it could end up just entering, the atmosphere of Mars and ending up, on the red planet, right on ground in the soil somewhere, in a barren place. But at least it has a radio beacon, and they can locate it and do the same thing as in my film. Get it with the electric vehicles, rocket drops to keep them alive with water and food, and then just take your time, travel across the planet, bring them to an outpost where they can survive for up to a year. And then, as normal outpost vehicles pass by with other astronauts, you just jump on the one that goes back to the main base, which would be Aquapan 1, and then they just go to live there, and they were a castaway. So, this video reveals, the third dimension. The first dimension is they had enough, equipment to rescue people with some problems because, with there's no radio beacons, they had to have forms recognition. They had to find white parachutes on the soil from, distant discovery of telescopic view or telescopic view from spacecraft. They could find stuff, It's not too hard to find white parachutes on a red soil. And computers can do it very quickly. It's just time consuming, and it was kind of cramped in that 30 days. That can be done. We can detect infrared of a capsule. That was the second dimension. Well, that was the first dimension before they had infrared detection and forms detection for capsules that are castaways. That's the first. The second is, infrared forms detection of white. Standardizing white as, the best substance for forms detection if there's a castaway. The third dimension is what I described as, a ship battle, which can happen, or a bomb on a ship that's, a sabotage. Well, it can happen. It happens in Earth. All the brave people in the transportation systems kind of they accept that stuff. And the ships, the aircraft, everything, it's happened. Look at in Yemen, our ship, for some reason I can't think of it because I'm thinking too much in space lately, but there was a ship that was bombed in Yemen, and it cost $200 million to fix it. It was bombed right in their port, and it was our battleship. I wish I could remember the name. I don't know why I can't remember it right now, but it was a long time ago. Those things happen, and that ship sailed the oceans, for years. And they decided to repair it. It cost $200 million. Well, there could be a bomb in a ship, and maybe there's still the ship, it's still operable, but, everything's kind of, I don't know, maybe they can't steer it anymore. Maybe they can't steer the ship. This is, you know, a more detailed ship realm that we're inventing through these stories in our solar system in a reality that's not even sci-fi. It's kind of a maimed ship, and there's no rocketries to steer it back to Mars. He's got to get back to Mars in the capsule. He just kind of jettisons back there and then could steer it into orbit and plug it into the orbit station. Doesn't even have to go down to the surface. That would be ideal, you know. Then they don't have to do a food drop to that capsule from the orbit station. That's the third level that they develop in Mars. They have a rescue system. They have a system that can help people that are jettisoned from, space battles. So, that ship is maimed and it's going through space at 24,000 miles an hour, and they don't have any control of it because the rocketries are maimed by this bomb. So you can't stop it. It's heading in a trajectory for Earth. We don't know if it's actually going to plunge into Earth and land in some city in Earth. It's more like, well, maybe it's heading toward Earth, and you know the Earth's spinning around the sun, and then maybe they did like a rocketry adjustment laterally, or slowed the ship or something to coincide with Earth. There was probably plans to use rocketries that would require it to coincide with Earth orbit, you know, and to get into Earth orbit, and it might not even hit Earth. Like there might have been some rocket changes for it to actually coincide with Earth, and the way it's going through space at 24,000, well, it goes, you know, in across the path of Earth, but Earth is like maybe to the left, a couple of hours, and then it just goes, you know, through this spaceship and lands in Venus and burns up and crashes in Venus. There's a possibility that something like a bombed ship in space that you can't control anymore, you could just eject from it. You just let it go. You know, probably wouldn't hit a planet. It just keeps going. Just leave it go. Space junk. Get out of there. Survive. Get in a space capsule, head back to orbit station in Mars, and this third level is, you know, what's being made. So I don't give away all the stuff. I like to, though, a little bit, because I don't want someone to sit in the scene only. In my style, it's, well, kind of knowledgeable, and I bring samples of what is ahead so that you can, like, add that to the scene. Instead of, like, seeing a scene and it's kind of like hopelessness, you know, or, well, that's a pretty good explanation. It's not hopeless. They evolve answers, continual answers in Rescued. And I haven't shared too much of, you know, giving away the story, but I like to share a little bit. So I hope you enjoyed this video.